So, in case you haven't heard, there's been kind of a run of black student athletes who are coming out talking about some of the injustices that they've experienced at their universities, and these have been Power Five major universities. And these black student athletes are just really taking the bull by the horns, and they're talking about things that they feel just are not fair with them. So I want to dive into that a little bit, and I'll preface this entire video by saying that I am a former Division One football player. I graduated. I appreciate the opportunity for me to go to a Division One school, play football while earning my degree. I do feel like it definitely helped me to a certain extent in terms of my life after sports. But nonetheless, what these young men are going through, me reading the articles, it's like I really understand what they're saying. And the average person may not understand. And I've read comments saying, how far are we going to let these players go? The coaches are supposed to be teaching them, not the other way around. Just take their scholarships away and they'll miss the scholarships. And these people live in a fantasy world. For one, you're not going to get paid more than your value. So when those student athletes are there as football players, they're not getting paid more than their value. And I'll take it a step further. They're actually funding a lot of what you call equivalency sports, and these are non-revenue sports, and that's what you title them. So for those of you who don't know, when it comes to Division One football, you have what's called head count and equivalency. Head count would be your football teams, your basketball teams, women's volleyball, women's basketball, things of that nature. What that means is every single player who is on a scholarship has to be on a full scholarship. You cannot offer a partial scholarship in a head count sport. Then you have equivalency sports. So you may have baseball, you may have lacrosse, field hockey, soccer, tennis, things of that nature are equivalency sports. So what that means is the coaches get allotted a certain amount of scholarships to fill a class. So for instance, you may have in your budget enough to fill 5 spots, but you have to fill 10. So you can give on average 50% scholarship to each student. The thing about the equivalency sport is this. A lot of these kids from equivalency sports, these sports are known as high cost sports. So generally with the AAU circuits and the travel ball and all of that, the parents are used to paying money. So these kids are getting a discount to go to these universities. And if you look at it, these sports are not primarily black sports. So it's a discount for these kids to go on in equivalency sports and earn at least half of their tuition paid for their duration of the time there. And it's less taxing on the body. These football players and basketball players are really just pulling the entire athletic department and they're funding it. So it is, there's a huge benefit to have these players out there playing. And the better your players are, the more fans, the more money you have for your budget and your athletic department. So it funds a lot of the ecosystem in the college landscape. So anyway, some people may say, well, what do these kids want? And you have the running back from Oklahoma State. His head coach was wearing a T-shirt that was offensive, and he says he wouldn't play there unless some things change. The coach met with the team. From everything I've read, the coach never apologized. The kid apologized for going to social media, but this is the dynamic. The coach has these kids there. The coach is making millions of dollars off of these kids and doesn't have the awareness to even consider that what he's wearing may be offensive. You have a coach at Clemson, and I believe he wore like Clemson Football Matters, right in the middle of this stuff. And you have some players who were upset. Now, he can be a great guy, don't get me wrong, but he's clueless. And that's part of the problem. Like, you don't think. You have to think. You sit in these kids' living rooms. You'll go to urban spots in anywhere USA to pick these kids up, but then you get them on campus and it's an entirely different world. I can tell you this from my personal experience as a black student athlete in a predominantly white institution. My background didn't afford me the opportunity to feel like I belonged when I walked on that campus. And the recruiting process was great. All the coaches love you and all of those things. But when reality hits and you walk in there and you sit in that class and you're like, wow, this is the first time I've really been around in an environment where I'm literally the minority. So like we call black people the minority, but well, like if you're in a black neighborhood, you don't really even conceptualize what that means until you walk on campus in a PWI. The problem with that is this. Those students who are there, who are coming from those backgrounds, there's no real assimilation. There's homesickness, but everything else is pretty much what you have grown up with. I know there's poor white students. I understand there's poor students everywhere. But when you're a black student and you come from an environment where that's all you see, it is definitely a shock to your system, and you have to adjust. So for me personally, I never felt attached to the campus. I never felt like I was a part of the campus. And it wasn't that there were bad people. Don't get me wrong. I was called an N-word only once during my time there at this university, and that was from some old white guy, and I don't know, it was in traffic, and he decides to pull up on side and call me an N-word. And oh yeah, and our the former head basketball coach, who was black, was also gunned down by a white supremacist during my time on campus. And these were things that weren't addressed. The coaches never called the African American kids in and say, "Wow, this is just a travesty that this would happen to a man because he was black." Like there's definitely no empathy, and the reason why it's no empathy is because it's ignorance. And I don't say ignorance in a bad way. What I mean is, as long as it doesn't hit your radar and it doesn't affect you, then it's difficult to really think about the problems. Like if our kids had a problem with depression, just because I'm not depressed doesn't mean I don't think about how those kids are feeling. And I feel like as a head coach, you need to always think about how those kids are feeling. What about the assistant coaches? Well, here's the problem with the assistant coaches. And again, before anybody comments on this video, I'm speaking from one, personal experience. So you can say there's assistant coaches here or there, and then two, this is not for every program. So if you're in a program that you feel doing it the right way, Godspeed. So what about the assistant coaches? Here's the thing with the assistant coaches. The assistant coaches are hired by the head coach. And a lot of times when you talk about football, and I'm coming from a football background, when you talk about football, a lot of the coaches are really A-type personalities, and they probably don't realize they are. But like, for instance, if you go to the coaches convention, everybody essentially has to dress a certain way. You have to approach coaches in a certain way. Like there's a certain coach etiquette, and the black coaches didn't make this one up. I can guarantee you that. And you're just expected to assimilate to that etiquette. You can never be your true self. So the point I'm getting at is this. You say, what about the coaches? Well, when those kids come in and they're from a foreign environment and there's things swirling around their universe, it's difficult to vibe with that coach because that coach has to walk a tightrope in between telling you a lot of stuff is BS that you go through on campus and probably as a member of this team, and saying, well, you know, that's just the way things are, and this is how we are, this is our culture. They have to be company guy, so it's tough because that's where their bills are being paid, company guy, and they get paid handsomely to coach these kids. So it's tough. It's tough to bite the hand that's feeding you. So a lot of these coaches walk around oblivious. I believe right now, out of 128 Division One head football coaches, there's 12 African American coaches. Yet African American kids represent nearly 50% of the rosters on these Division One teams. So now you're taking these kids and you're putting them in a position where, for one, the coaches that look like them are walking that fine line, and it's not enough of those coaches that look like them to even come together to create a sense of community for these kids. You all have to realize when these kids walk on this campus, yes, the degree is important. I understand that. A lot of these kids are trying to play the game at the highest level. So they sacrifice a lot of social life. They sacrifice a lot of extracurricular activities. They sacrifice certain majors. So they're going in what I call the discount major program, where it's not overly difficult. They can get the passing grades and they continue to play football. And that's something that they have been conditioned to do. So with all of that going on, and you're sitting in these classrooms with this kid from such and such prep or this kid from such and such academy, and these kids are conditioned to come in and take advantage of the education, and you're just holding on to your tail, and you're just trying to figure it out. And then with all of these things swirling, you feel like my safe spot is with my team, and you realize they just want me to be more of the same. And the onus is on these coaches to start changing their attitudes and changing their mentalities and making it a safe zone for these players. I personally think these colleges need liaisons. And if they're African-American liaisons because they fit the kids, I think they need liaisons. But they do need liaisons to be able to relate to the entire student-athlete population. I feel like every single aspect of the student-athlete has different issues, has different concerns, has different things. But I think if that face is the face of a black person, it really gives these kids, these black kids, a sense of comfort. And that liaison cannot be held accountable by that head coach because it ruins the entire dynamic. So somehow, some way, that liaison, his salary cannot be determined by the head coach. Maybe he gets some objectives that he has to hit, blah, 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 per the AD, but he has to have a complete autonomy to address those players. And as long as everything is in alignment with the philosophy of that program, I think he should be there. I can tell you this, players, we don't trust a lot of people. So when you get that person and you think he's on payroll, it's hard to trust him. So anyway, my whole thing is this. Yes, the education is valuable. All of the perks and benefits that comes along with being a D1 player is valuable. But to ask a kid or a young man to give up his pride and his sense of self, that's a big ask, because that goes all the way throughout your life and you never quite feel like you belong. So college coaches, we need to get it together. We need to become more self-aware of these kids, and we need to create better environments by surrounding them with more coaches and more support staff that looks like them. Again, thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe, and before you judge us, make sure you get to know us. Peace.